Prologue. Every spring, the Prince of Autumn chooses a bride from the mortal realm. Every spring, her people whisper she'll be dead by fall. It has been like that for approximately 400 brides. When the Fey Prince first rode forth seeking a human woman to marry, no one knew to be wary. The bride's people celebrated. They marveled at the bounty of their Fey neighbors and coveted their wealth. They believed if the Fey Lord meant to choose a wife from among them, he must mean to share his abundance with them. No one imagined the prince would return a year later to demand another bride, refusing to disclose the fate of his first. On the morning of the second choosing, as would be the case for the next 400 years, 10 families awoke to discover a summons on their door. The missives were penned on the finest vellum in a script of elegant gold. The prince called them invitations, yet there was no suggestion in the summons. The maidens were commanded to assemble. The prince would make his selection and marry his bride on the same evening. Afterward, the couple would return to his kingdom accompanied by his finest warriors. The woman would never be seen or heard from again. 3 years after the first bride vanished, 5 of the maidens refused to gather for the choosing. That year, the prince did not select a bride. He returned to Fairy alone, and by daybreak, all 10 maidens had died of a mysterious, wasting illness. As if in mourning, the spring rains would not cease. The rivers overflowed their banks and flooded the muddy fields. The crops were planted late. Spring gave way to summer, but the sun seemed not to notice. The plants molded, the fruits and vegetables withered on sickened vines. What survived of the wheat was consumed by locusts. Hunger and disease stalked the villages. When frost came to spread his icy fingers over the darkened window panes, he was early. The snow immediately followed. Whole families were decimated, their once vibrant homes reduced to empty, lifeless shells. Those who survived did so by any means necessary, resorting to tactics they would never confess to later. Some resorted to thievery, taking what little food and supplies they could from their weakened neighbors. Others turned to violence, willing to kill for a handful of rotting roots or scraps of meat. Their desperation was such that some even ventured into the overflowing graveyards, scavenging for sustenance in the form of decayed flesh. It was a terrible, cursed year. As the spring air blew through the land the next year, the king of the mortal realm stood at the border of their lands, waiting to meet the Fey Prince. Once again, there would be no bride. The king's own daughter had perished the year before after defying the prince's summons. The human king appeared with a formidable army behind him, ready to defend his people and avenge his child. By sunrise, the once proud king lay defeated, surrounded by his fallen soldiers and 10 lifeless maidens. Blood stained the ground, and from it, there grew flowers. Fields and fields of red poppies. Poppies that would continue to bloom each spring after that, a silent but powerful reminder of what befell the king who refused the prince's choosing. The spring after that, there were hardly 10 women of the necessary age left to answer the call. Still, 10 assembled, a bride was selected, and the year that followed proved bounteous. The people fattened and gave thanks. The following spring, they remembered. All 10 women assembled again for the choosing. It would be another 50 years before there would be a spring without a bride. That year, a wealthy merchant paid a woman to attend the choosing in his daughter's stead. When the impostor arrived at the cathedral, dressed in the merchant's daughter's gown and with the summons in her hand, no mortal could tell the difference. And yet, the deceit was discovered. Death and destruction followed. Order was only restored with the selection of a new bride the subsequent spring. Centuries passed in the same appalling manner. The first time I saw the prince was shortly after my parents died. I was curious, and the worst thing my child's mind could imagine had already happened to me. Unlike the other villagers, I did not hide as twilight approached. The staccato rhythm of horse hooves thundered against the silence of the deserted streets, but when the prince's coach turned the corner, passing into a shimmering beam of fading light, all but the bewitching beauty of his conveyance fell away from my eyes and observances. The carriage was magnificent, a ball of glittering gilded glass that seized the dusky light and returned it in a spectacular shower of autumnal orange and gold. It made the streets glimmer, painted the dull grey buildings with colours belonging not to wintry spring but to ripened fields, blazing hearth fires, and memories of home. The coach was beautiful, and so was he as he stepped out of it. The prince. Curiously, when the horses pulled up to the cathedral where the maidens were assembled, he did not immediately descend. One of his armoured knights opened the door, yet still he did not emerge. When he finally removed himself from the confines of the coach, it was with the air of a man who had few choices. Despite all the glittering grandeur surrounding him, it seemed the carriage served not as an instrument of freedom but in some way as his cage. The prince glanced at his men, who stood grimly by, then raised his head and set his shoulders. His hair, a rich russet shade, shone against his burnished brown gold coat. I was entranced by his commanding presence and underlying sorrow, and I could not help but inch closer for a better view. The prince was led by a regiment of soldiers in crisp, mail armor toward the grand entrance of the church, each one flanking him on either side. He walked with an air of regal confidence, but his body betrayed him with its tense posture and quickened breaths. As he approached the entrance, he slowed his pace, as if he could feel someone or something watching him. His eyes darted around nervously. Our eyes met, and it was as if time slowed and marked the moment, too. A jolt of something curious passed between us, a bridging of the gap between mortal child and immortal fae. We understood each other. Or something critical about our shared experiences of sorrow and of loss. My people say the prince is evil, but they say the same of me. Not because I've ever harmed or been a threat to them, but because they don't understand me. In all the many years of the prince's visitations, they've never sought to understand him either. Not once have they asked what causes him to come, whether it be of his own will or whether it be of somebody else's. We've never asked what we might do to help him make the visits stop. This morning, I received his summons. As many women before me, I'll go and report for inspection. If selected, I'll do what I must to make this madness end.